Kiev admits to carrying out drone attack in Sevastopol. Kiev was behind the drone attack in Sevastopol Bay, Ukrainian officials confirmed. However, officials denied Russia's claim that the attack jeopardized the operation of the grain corridor. Andriy Yusov, Ukraine's defense spokesman, told state broadcaster Sevastopol, recent events in Crimea are only related to military facilities and have nothing to do with the grain deal, which regulates the Ukrainian civil ports and ports. Ukraine complies with international obligations, including fulfilling all obligations related to the grain corridor, added Yusov. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the situation regarding the grain deal in the Black Sea had reached an impasse, adding that there were still obstacles preventing Russian exports. Lavrov made his comments during a press conference at the United Nations. The deal was extended last month for 60 days, but Russia has signaled that it may not agree to a further extension unless the West removes obstacles to its grain and fertilizer exports. Russia. 2. Russian-backed official says Ukraine fired 6 HIMARS into strategic southern town. According to a senior Russian-appointed official in the invaded area of Zaporizhia, a total of 6 rockets fired by the Ukraine high-mobility missile system hit the town of Kabak in southern Ukraine. Vladimir Rogov, a member of the military-civilian administration, said that 4 of the rockets were shot down by Russian air defenses and 2 landed north of the city. According to preliminary reports, 1 civilian was killed and 4 others were injured of varying degrees of severity, he said. Why is town important? Sir, Tokmak, about 70 kilometers northeast of Melitopol, has become the center of Russian forces in Zaporizhia. That's where a counteroffensive from Ukraine is expected, due to its strategic location between Crimea, the Russian-invaded territory in eastern Ukraine, and mainland Russia. Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said last week that a counterattack would not be announced. Elsewhere in the region, Russia is also trying to attack what it sees as Ukrainian targets. The town of Orikhiv, about 40 miles southeast of Zaporizhia, has seen repeated bombardment of anything that might look like a military hub, sports schools, farm warehouses, and facilities. Empty building. 3. Russia is urgently evacuating its minions from the town in the Zaporizhia region. Ukrainian officials are reporting that evacuation measures are being taken in several Russian-controlled towns in the invaded Zaporizhia regions. Yevhen Yevtushenko, head of the military administration of the Ukrainian-controlled Nikopol district, said that according to residents on the opposite side of the Dnipro River, held by Russia, evacuation buses had started arriving. He said a young family tried to register to evacuate from the Kamyanka-Dniprovska settlement, but the authorities refused. So far, only top collaborators have been evacuated, while the rest are waiting for the arrival of the Ukrainian armed forces, he stated. In one video, some people can be heard wanting to evacuate for fear of dying between 2 bullets. However, a representative of the so-called civil-military government erected by Russia said, "Unfortunately, seats for these buses have been reserved at the discretion of the authorities. There is no room at the moment." This town is located near the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. People were afraid that before they left, the Russians would bombard them with mass casualties and blame Ukraine for everything, Yevtushenko said. Ukrainian officials last week said Russian-backed authorities in nearby Enerhodar were planning to arrange an evacuation from the town in early May. There continues to be speculation that this part of Zaporizhia could be the target of a Ukrainian counterattack in the coming weeks. 4. Dozens of Moscow police officers were arrested. 2 vice presidents of the Russian lower house of parliament found dead on the same day. Russia's state news agency TASS reported that over the past few weeks, Russia's Federal Security Service, or FSB for short, and the Security Directorate General of the Interior Ministry, or MVD for short, have carried out mass inspections. At the Department of Internal Affairs of the Central District of Moscow and a number of other agencies, especially the Moscow District Police Office. The American Institute for the Study of War, or ISW for short, said these came after allegations by the FSB of leaking data from Russian security forces to Ukrainian nationals. TASS cited law enforcement agencies as saying that inspections are being carried out at the Directorate of Internal Affairs of Russia in the Central District, as well as at the regional departments of internal affairs agencies. Several Russian police officers were detained. The Latvian-based Russian-language media agency Meduza said they were arrested for their involvement in the attempted coup against Putin. Against this backdrop, Newsweek ran a report titled "Two Russian Officials Found Dead on Same Day," which means, 2 Russian officials found dead on same day. 2 vice presidents of the Russian State Duma of the ruling United Russia Party were reported dead on Sunday. The death of Nikolai Bortsov, 77, who served as Deputy State Duma from 2003 until his death, was announced by Igor Artemonov, governor of the Lipetsk region. He died at his home in Lebedyen. On the same day, Deputy State Duma Zakharbek Uzdanov died at the age of 57. Vladimir Vasilyev, chairman of the United Russia Party, said Uzdanov died after a serious and prolonged illness. A number of prominent Russians have been killed in unexplained or unusual circumstances since Russian President Vladimir Putin launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. No cause has been given for Bortsov's death. He had previously been affected by sanctions from the United States and other Western countries related to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Newsweek has reached out to the Russian Foreign Ministry by email for comment. Bortsov is one of Russia's wealthiest government employees, with an estimated net worth of $550 million, according to Latvia-based independent news agency Meduza. He is included in the 2021 Forbes list of the richest federal workers in the country. He was sentenced in absentia in Ukraine to 15 years in prison on March 21 along with 19 other members of the Russian State Duma for voting to recognize the Russian-installed government in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. The head of the Russian Investigative Committee Alexander Bastrikin called the ruling illegal. Uzdanov, 57, is a member of the Russian Lower House Committee on Ecology, Natural Resources, and Environmental Protection. A difficult day. Death has taken another comrade in our ranks. Jasherbek Borisovich Uzdanov, Deputy State Duma, former Minister of Natural Resources and Ecology of the Republic of Karachay-Cherkasy, has died after a long and serious illness, Vasilyev said. Vasilyev sends condolences to relatives and friends of Uzdanov. Sensitive, caring, strong-willed, always ready to help, this is how we will remember Jasherbek Borisovich. He fought for a long time, but unfortunately, the disease became stronger. We will miss him very much, he said. Uzdanov was elected to the State Duma on September 19, 2021. He was subject to US and New Zealand sanctions after the war began. At least 20 Russians have died under mysterious circumstances since the war began last February, including Ravil Maganov, chairman of Lukoil, Yuri Voronov, founder and general manager of the shipping company, and Logistics Astra Shipping, Vladislav Aveyev, a former Kremlin official, and vice president of Gazprom Bank, and Major General Vladimir Makarov, an officer who oversaw the Kremlin's crackdown on anti-war protesters. 5. It's time for the NATO alliance to stop making excuses and accept Ukraine as a member. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said it was time for the NATO alliance to stop making excuses and accept Ukraine as a member because the country has shown its readiness and has much to offer. Speaking to Foreign Affairs, Kuleba said the coalition's political will was very lacking on the matter of admitting Ukraine. As I say these things, air raid sirens are sounding in Kiev, and Russia is in the midst of a months-long assault on Bakhmut, he said. Moscow is also preparing to repel a series of counterattacks by Ukraine. So I have a simple answer to anyone who argues that admitting Ukraine to NATO would provoke Russia. Are you serious? 6. Sweden expels 5 Russian diplomats. On Tuesday, Swedish Foreign Minister Tobias Billström told public broadcaster SVT, Sweden called the Russian ambassador and informed him that 5 people working at the embassy have been asked to leave from the country due to activities inconsistent with the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Sweden expelled 3 Russian diplomats last April after Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. 7. A court in Russia has sentenced a former police officer. A Russian court has convicted a former police officer of publicly spreading false information about the country's military after he criticized the war in Ukraine to friends over the phone. The AP reported that a former police officer, Semil Vedel, was sentenced to 7 years in prison on Monday under a law that the Kremlin passed days after sending troops into Ukraine and has been actively using to fight stifled dissidents. In addition to the prison sentence, He was also banned from working in law enforcement for 4 years after his release. Authorities accused Vedal of spreading information about Russia's military actions in Ukraine that deviated from the official statement of the Ministry of Defense. In 3 phone conversations with friends last year, Vedal called Russia a killer country, and used the phrase, "Glory to Ukraine," as a greeting and declared that Russia was suffering losses, huge, in Ukraine, according to the prosecutor of the case. Officials consider the conversations public because Vedal's phone was tapped and an investigator overheard the calls. That argument, which Vedal's attorney dismissed as absurd, had not previously been used in cases involving allegations of spreading misinformation. Vedal, who was born in Ukraine, said he only shared information he got from friends at the Kiev police department that he trusted. 8. Russia's 7 fronts and Ukraine's counteroffensive. Newsweek ran a report titled, "How Russia's 7 front lines shape up for Ukraine's counteroffensive," which means, Russia's 7 fronts define the way of Ukraine's counteroffensive. According to the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, Russia is operating along 7 axes that could determine how Ukraine will launch its intended counteroffensive. With speculation growing about the Kiev forces' next move after they've crossed the Dnipro River, the US-based think tank has outlined how the Russian military has engaged in 5 offensive operations. Labor. These operations took place in Lupyansk, Luhansk, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Donetsk City and western Donetsk/eastern Zaporizhia. Russian defensive operations are taking place in the western axis of the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, ISW said Sunday. In Kupiansk, Russia launched parts of the Western Military District, or WMD for short, carrying out limited offensive operations in the first part of 2023, although they have failed to make significant operational gains, moving. The ISW added that the WMD 2nd Motorized Rifle Division may have been deployed towards the Kharkiv-Luhansk Oblast border. Another front ran along the Svatov and Kremlin lines. There, Russia brought parts of 2 military districts, WMD and Central Military District, as well as 2 airborne divisions into an unsuccessful assault on Luhansk that culminated in only a few gains. Local tactics. The 3rd front outlined by the ISW is in Bakhmut, the town of Donetsk that has been fiercely contested for months. The ISW says that the resources that Moscow has unleashed on the town indicate it wants to capture it before the start of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Russia's 4th front line, as described by the ISW, is the Avdiivka-Donetsk city axis, where Moscow deploys units from the Northern Fleet, the Southern Military District, or SMD for short, and part of the Communist People's Republic of Donetsk. However, Russia has made no significant operational progress on this axis in 2023 other than minor tactical advances around Avdiivka and within Marinka. Meanwhile, in the axis south of Donetsk and east of Zaporizhia, elements of the Eastern Military District to the west of Donetsk Oblast near Volodar have suffered repeated losses after several failed attempts to capture Volodar. In connection with Russian defensive operations, Moscow brought SMD elements and special units to its western Zaporizhia axis. These groups may be less exhausted and degraded than forces elsewhere on the front, said the think tank, given the primarily defensive nature of their operations. Russian groups in Kherson are also likely to be the most disorganized and unmanaged groups in the entire battlefield. Since Russia withdrew its troops from Kherson last year, this part of the front has been virtually quiet, while morale, poor training and discipline are problems, especially when the more combative conventional elements are engaged elsewhere. Reports surfaced over the weekend that Ukrainian troops had landed on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River amid speculation a Ukrainian offensive could be aimed at pushing back Russian troops south from the river. Crimea was annexed by Russia. Newsweek has reached out to the Russian Defense Ministry by email for comment. 9. How Ukraine can retake Crimea, according to former U.S. General Ben Hodges. General Ben Hodges, the former commander of U.S. troops in Europe, believes that the Ukrainian counteroffensive will pursue ambitions far greater than victory in the battle at Bakhmut. Even if Ukraine could kill every Russian soldier within 200 miles of Bakhmut, it wouldn't change the strategic situation, he told The Sun Online. The key is to win Crimea, that will be the decisive terrain. Once Crimea is liberated, it will all be over, it will change everything. Ukraine knows it will never be safe without taking back Crimea. Newsweek ran an article titled, How Ukraine Can Retake Crimea, per ex-US General Ben Hodges, which translates to "How Ukraine Can Retake Crimea," according to former US General Ben Hodges. This invasion started with Crimea, it will end with Crimea, announced Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in 2022 when discussing his country's ongoing resistance to the latest war of aggression of Russia. Recapturing the peninsula, invaded by Moscow forces with the support of local collaborators since 2014, is perhaps Kiev's most ambitious war goal. Protruding out into the Black Sea and bordering the Sea of Azov on one side, Crimea is an important part of the regional strategic puzzle and key in protecting its vital trade shipping lanes. But Ukraine will have to fight hard to win such an award. Russian forces are believed to be preparing the peninsula and approaches from southern Ukraine in advance of a counterattack. Crimea's unique geographical challenges pose many dangers to attackers, and its political importance to President Vladimir Putin means the Russian military is there, and locals sympathize with Russia, can be expected to deploy a staunch defense. In an interview with Newsweek, retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who previously served as commander of the U.S. Army in Europe, laid out 3 stages in which Kiev's army could capture Crimea. Start begins with Ukraine's long-awaited spring counterattack. There are many ways the Ukrainians are thinking about this, General Hodges explained. Obviously they know the geography, they know the history, the weather, they know what the Russians have there. I assume they have near-perfect intelligence on what's going on inside Crimea. And I certainly hope that we are helping, USA and UK. A valuable prize. Ukraine has been ravaged by 14 months of war. The country's economy shrank by just a third last year, and Russia's invasion has eaten away at the workforce while strangling vital agricultural and industrial exports by sea. Has traditionally been central to Ukraine's prosperity. General Hodges said Kiev will not be able to secure commercial shipping in the Black Sea unless the peninsula is liberated. If the Russians continue to control Crimea, either because they defeated the Ukrainians or because of some peaceful solution, then Ukraine will never be able to rebuild its economy because Crimea blocks the way out, he said. Into the Sea of Azov. General Hodges said that even the major ports of Odessa and Mykolaiv, both under tight Ukrainian control, would still be threatened by Russian troops in Crimea. You can step back and not focus on Crimea, but looking at the Black Sea, it is clear that Russia can block, whenever it wants, ships coming in and out of any kind of Ukrainian port. That's an important part of this, not only because we think about Ukraine's economy, but also about the economy of the European Union and the whole of Europe, General Hodges said. If Ukraine cannot rebuild its economy, then you will have millions of Ukrainian refugees still all over Europe. This is a real problem for the whole of Europe if Ukraine cannot build back to its economy. So, General Hodges said Russia-held Crimea is a dagger pointed at Ukraine's stomach. What can Kiev do to improve Russia's threat from Crimea? First you isolate the peninsula, says Hodges. When you look at the map, it starts to look more and more like a trap, or maybe a dead end to the Russians. And you can isolate it by cutting the earth bridge first. The land bridge, running from Russia's southwestern border west of Rostov-on-Don, through the invaded Donetsk, Mariupol, Berdyansk, Melitopol and to the Dnipro River, is Moscow's greatest achievement in more than a year. War. This corridor allows Russia to better supply the Crimean Peninsula, which until February 2022 depends on the Kerch Strait Bridge reinforced by rail transit lines. Ukrainian forces attacking south from Zaporizhia and east from Kherson would jeopardize this vital corridor. I don't know this, but I think it's one of the main targets of the coming Ukrainian offensive, Hodges said. Break that land bridge, and when you're done with that, Phase 2 begins. The second stage is bombardment. If Ukrainian forces could reach Crimea's doorstep, most of the peninsula's most sensitive military and infrastructure targets would be within sight. The Ukrainian military has proven adept at using Western long-range weapons, as well as indigenous technology, to attack Russian command posts, troop concentrations, and supply centers. Crimea has multiple targets, including the Sevastopol naval base and the Sakhay air base, both of which were attacked. General Hodges said of the second stage of the offensive, you start hitting targets to make the peninsula uninhabitable to Russian forces. You attack Sevastopol and the Black Sea Fleet is forced to leave, They can't sit there while precision weapons are pouring down ships, or harbor facilities, fuel, ammunition etc. Air base in Sakei also. General Christopher Cavalli, current commander of U.S. forces in Europe, has said that accuracy can defeat mass, given enough time. General Hodges said this approach may be appropriate in Crimea, where Moscow has deployed significant forces due to concerns about Ukrainian activities. With an army that depends on a large infantry force, it must have headquarters and artillery, he said. And so, with precision, you start knocking down headquarters, you start knocking down ammunition depots and you knock down transport hubs. I think it's phase 2, pursuing those kinds of goals to make it impossible for Russia to stay and fight effectively in Crimea. General Hodges added that Western weapons could give Ukraine the advantage it needs to do this. Kiev already has US-made high-mobility artillery missile systems armed with guided serial missile system ammunition, with a range of 56 miles or 90 kilometers. But despite repeated requests from Ukraine, Washington refused to provide the longest-range HIMARS ammunition. It is the military tactical missile system MGM-140 with a range of 190 miles or 305 kilometers for fear that the Ukrainian army will attack deep inside Russian territory. If the Ukrainians had an ATACMS, for example, the Black Sea Fleet would have left Sevastopol a long time ago, because the Ukrainians have already attacked that place, Hodges said. The same thing with their air base in Sakei and some other targets. Hodges said ATACMS, Grey Eagle drones and other long-range systems will make a big difference. He added, I think this stems from the fact that the authorities, the governments of Germany, Great Britain and France were not fully committed to helping Ukraine win. They are concerned, I think unnecessarily, that this could somehow lead to nuclear escalation. Or it could lead to the collapse of the Russian Federation and the Chinese don't want that. Or maybe Europeans aren't. But the bottom line is, they're not willing to say we want Ukraine to win. Liberate, release, free. Fighting on the peninsula, in marshy places and elsewhere with mountains, would be difficult. The Ukrainian military will also have to deal with hundreds of thousands of residents of Russian origin, or at least those who have not fled. In 2014, the population of Ukrainian descent in Crimea was less than that of Russians when compared to the rest of the country, as evidenced by the election and referendum results. When Russian troops occupied the peninsula, thousands of Ukrainian soldiers and officials are said to have defected. With nearly a decade of integration with Russia and relentless ideological indoctrination, the advancing Ukrainian military may have to deal with hostile locals. You have to go in there and clean it up and take it over, Hodges said. How that happened, I'm not exactly sure yet. It won't be an easy task, that's for sure. But I think the Ukrainians will think about how they do it. Kiev will have to make a decision about what to do with the Kerch Strait Bridge, which was targeted by Ukrainian attacks last year. They're not going to knock that bridge down right away. I think they'll leave it alone so people can leave, so they really need a bridge to get out of there if they see what's going on and they don't want to stay under Ukraine's control. I think the Ukrainians will destroy it at some point, but I think in the near future they will probably keep it, unless the Russians focus on using this bridge after the land bridge has been destroyed. Cut. If Russia dumps more capabilities over the Kerch Bridge, the Ukrainians may decide to destroy it. General Hodges suggested that the loss of Crimea could hasten the end of the broader war, which has raged at varying intensities for more than 9 years. I think once Crimea is liberated, the Kremlin will be a lot less enthusiastic about clinging to these really poor ravaged areas in eastern Ukraine, he said. What's really important to them about the Donbass is having a land bridge to Crimea. I don't think they really care much about the small villages of Donetsk and Luhansk, even though they lost thousands of soldiers there. Newsweek has reached out to the Russian Defense Ministry by email to request comment.